welcome to a random Friday session of API reviews, where we're trying to catch up from the holidays. All right. Do we have Jason people on the call?
Looks like no, I don't see Steve.
I'm here.
Oh, there's Steve Harder. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, unless you want to talk about writable DOM and dynamic support for Jason.
I'd be happy to. But you won't be interested in what I have to say, though.
If you're going to say no, I'm extremely happy with what you're going to say.
I think that the Steves in general might actually outnumber us in this meeting. So.
All right, how about 28776? Link APIs for index and range on IEnumerable of T.
Oh boy. I know there's some discussion in the issue about this, but this is going to be fun if you don't know ahead of time whether the collection is countable or not.
I think this one's probably one of the dedicated session ones where we're going to have like 15 minutes of setup explaining the overall design and how these functions work, why they're being exposed, etc.
Okay. Eric T, I see your name on this. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would think so. Even though like it's very slim, so I think we could maybe do this in half an hour, optimistically speaking. Actually, I approved this just this morning for. I set it as ready for review just this morning. It's basically just three methods. I don't know how do people feel about doing this today.
I mean, we could go over it, but I think half an hour is actually going to be really optimistic.
Fair enough.
Because I see in the discussion that we would want to separate the discussion from the API from the implementation. But to be honest, I don't think the two can be divorced like that. Because when we start talking about things like index and range, our slice methods are, for instance, guaranteed to return an instance of the exact same type that the original list parameter is. And how do you do that with things like IEnumerable?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
So when you slice an array or a string or a span or a memory or something like that, we return back to you a concrete span or string or memory or something. Doing that on an interface is a bit weird because we don't actually have a guarantee that we can even create the type that the original list parameter was. So already we would be violating one facet of what we said we want our slice APIs to look like. So that's why I think like we can't really divorce the API review from the actual implementation of the method. They have to be talked about together.
Sure, yeah. For what it's worth, the original poster has actually provided implementations, which I've taken a look at, and they seem reasonable. The core idea there being that it's basically using the exact same, per your question, it uses the exact same semantics as take and skip. So that...
Does the slice method return if the original input is uncountable?
Yes, it does.
Really?
And that basically means that the implementation would be O in space, necessarily.
How did you do that without solving the halting problem?
Well, I mean, if you can actually click at the implementation, it will show you how it's done, but it's doable.
Levi,
But it actually...
What is your implementation concern, Levi? What's an example of an input you're concerned about?
Source1.element, the very first thing that they have here, source1.element at index : caret 5.
Don't we already have that with take last?
Yes, but you could take last, like the name explicitly says I'm going to enumerate the entire thing, whereas element at doesn't necessarily imply that. Like if I do element at index : caret 1 billion, like do I reasonably expect to enumerate every single element from the underlying enumerable? Like I'm enumerating 1 billion elements that I know I'm just going to throw at the end.
I mean,
Generally,
today if you do element at 50,000, and you've given it a I collection, it's going to iterate through 50,000.
It is, yes, but I think it's a lot easier for people to reason about skipping things from the front rather than throwing away stuff at the end. But you know, I would be willing to say that they're symmetric.
I think the concern here is when you're taking it from the front, you just have to iterate and throw away up to index. But if you're taking from the rear, you actually have to get the count first, and then get the index from the end of that count. So you actually have to potentially iterate the entire enumerable, regardless.
well, the design here basically talks about iterating the enumerable once, but that necessarily implies if you're taking the element at caret 5, for example, it means having to store at least 5 elements in a queue. So if you do like caret, the entire size of the enumerable, it basically means that you would have to store every single element of that enumerable.
Yeah, I guess I just don't. I'm struggling with the difference from take last, but
It's essentially the same.
All right. Do we want to keep discussing this one or do it later?
Up to you. Let's do it later.
Okay. All right. Some obsolescence proposals. Yay.
Awesome.
All right. So you're up first, Levi, with RNG crypto service provider.
Yeah, so no one should be using this type. Everyone should be using the static APIs that we put on the base class instead. That said, there is one potential scenario that I could see where someone might want to keep using this type, and that is for unit testing purposes, their own code takes the abstract base class as a parameter, and during unit tests, they mock it out, and in the actual implementation of their application, they pass, the concrete RNG crypto service provider. But again, like, everyone should just be using the static methods on the base type. No one should be using the instance methods. Mm-hmm. If you want to unit test this, like, you should really make your own irandom or something.
I mean, if they want to pass in an instance, they can still use the rng.create. They don't care that it's an RNG CSP. Do you know if Windows still has any use out of asking for a different RNG by name? Are they even respecting that anymore?
I don't think our code respects that, to be honest. But let me double check that.
You can't use source.net because that'll show you the Unix implementation of the type, but the Windows implementation taking a CSP parameters might actually still do something.
Double checking.
But we don't have usage data on this site anymore.
The common implementation of the API just ignores these CSP parameters.
Right, but that's the Unix one.
No, I'm looking at the common implementation.
Really? We just throw it away? Okay.
It's just thrown away.
All right, then in core there's no purpose for the type.
Yeah, because it's the RNG crypto service provider type is a dumb wrapper around an implementation, and the implementation takes no such parameter across MUS.
And I think, Jeff, you had a question?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so you said the new static APIs. New static APIs are implemented using different Windows APIs or different underlying APIs that are the new official blessed ones. Is that correct? That's why we want people to use those instead of the old class?
Well, this would forward to them anyway. But really what we're trying to do is we're trying to simplify the API structure and say, like, this whole complexity that used to exist regarding, like, oh, read the documentation on whether this is type safe. Oh, now you have to remember to dispose this and then you're finished with it, blah, blah, blah. Like, no, just ignore all of that. Just call the static give me random data method and, go on with your life.
So we introduce new APIs. We think they're clearly better and handle all the cases that the old one did. except maybe for the fact that they don't implement the same abstraction like you mentioned earlier, but let's ignore that for now. And so we just want to tell people, don't use this, use the new one, it's easier. It does the same thing basically, but it does it a lot with a much cleaner and simpler to understand API.
Yes.
Great, makes sense.
Yeah, the recommended is just to call random number generator.fill and fill your buffer. And if you do need an instance because you're doing mocking, then you can call random number generator.create and it'll give you the system RNG. You don't need to care that it came from Windows Cappy because it doesn't. All right. Any dissent?
I would probably change the message that's listed in the issue here and just provide examples of like, oh, if you're using the instance get bytes API, use the static one instead, and just like link to a page of samples or something.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this would be with whatever the next ID is, right? So,
Yeah.
Next ID. Yeah.
I mean, we're not ripping this thing out, obviously. Like, if you have existing code, it's going to keep working.
Yeah, and so then that's just messaging on the page. So.
Yeah.
All right, and then since there are some other crypto obsolescence, let's just stay on theme. So we have the class hierarchy of type called Rindal. Rindal was the algorithm that now is known as AES. AES has more restrictions than the full algorithm did. In core, we don't actually support the full Rindal algorithm. It's just a wrapper over AES, and we've had at least one bug caused by the fact that we don't think about this hierarchy anymore because it's just a wrapper over AES, but we had forgotten to override a property to forward to the implementation, and well, it turns out we tell people don't use this type, and now we want to paint the obsolete attribute on the type of really don't use this type. There's literally no reason to use it in core.
Yeah.
So. Any dissent?
Do we actually know how many people even attempt to use this in core?
I mean, at least one did, because we got a bug that somebody was using it with CFB, and we'd forgotten to forward the feedback size property.
Yeah.
I think largely it's people who are porting from framework. And so if they're porting from framework and they change their TFM to be a net core specific one, then we should just tell them, hey, don't use this type.
Presumably the message on the obsolete attribute or the link or whatever will say, just use the new AES class and everything should work.
Yep.
Sounds good.
Yeah, instead of new Rindal managed or Rindal.create, the correct answer is AES.create. Alright.
Minor suggestion, should we be recording this for Imo's benefit?
Well, it's
being live streamed.
Yeah, being live streamed, so
Oh.
YouTube is the recording.
I see. Sorry, I missed that part.
Alright, and similarly, this is a proposal to obsolete every derived type that we have of any algorithm where the derived type provides no benefit. So for AES, we have the AES.create static method, which returns a non-public type. But we have the public type AES crypto service provider and AES managed, both of which just wrap instances of AES.create. Or themselves just use the same code. But like AES managed is not managed. AES crypto service provider does not use Windows CAPI. And the same thing is true for everything here in this list. This list does not include the type AES-CNG because it does have a platform-specific constructor, or triple des CNG because it also has a platform-specific constructor. But notably, all of these types are already EB never in Netcore, and now they'll just be EB never and obsolete.
So this one is a little interesting compared to previous proposals because these types actually are used significantly throughout full framework code, just because people out of force habit use them. So if they're copying their full framework code into a core CLR app, then it would still compile with EB never, but going forward it will no longer compile.
Unless they disable the warning of don't use unnecessary derived types for cryptographic algorithms.
That should probably be okay because it is still a straightforward enough replacement.
Yeah. Yeah, for the new expressions, it's easy enough to replace them with the right answer. It may require more work than I've had to do because if it's a variable declaration, then you'd have to go change the variable. You may have to change the variable target type, and it may be that they had a method that took a SHA-384 crypto service provider when they really just meant hash algorithm.
Yeah.
So it's not a 100% foolproof. We can write a replacer analyzer, but it is a very mechanical change.
It is, yeah.
But yeah, so my thinking on this is all of the things in here would use the same sum ID, which would be different from the Reindahl one and different from the RNG CSP one, which is why they're in 3 separate issues.
You would have this as separate from the Reindahl one. I guess, yeah, because it's an actual behavioral change.
Yeah, because the Reindahl one is if you change the block size, we don't support that, which you would have gotten from the PNSE. But and now it's like, hey, by the way, this algorithm is called AES. You can't see it in the type hierarchy, but use AES. And these are, you went to specific, pop up a level.
Yeah, if we do off solutions like this, I would prefer for us to front load them in an early preview just so we can see how painful they are. Because I would think that if we provide good guidance on this, like it literally would be a search and replace thing for most people.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
It makes sense on its face, yeah.
Any dissent? All right.
Jeremy, just quick question. Do types like SHA-1CNG work on non-Windows?
SHA-1CNG does not, because it wasn't part of Net Standard 2.0. That whole assembly just is PNSE on Unix. SHA-1CSP does because it was part of Net Standard 2.0.
Got it.
Okay. Yes, I'm aware my C# doesn't compile because of the pluses, but who cares? All right, 42967, an analyzer for methods with a PNSE body but missing platform attributes. This seems like it's more related to us than others, but I guess an analyzer is an analyzer.
Yeah, so we have applied some attributes, supported or unsupported, but we might still missing some, and this analyzer is supposed to flag them if there is a method throwing the platform not supported exception but not having supported or unsupported attribute.
Wouldn't there be a lot of false positives because some of the platform not supported exceptions were saying core doesn't support this as opposed to the OS doesn't support this?
Core doesn't support this?
I feel like there are many places where we're throwing a platform not supported exception of something worked in .NET Framework and we've just chosen not to make it work in .NET Core.
Presumably, the experience would then be it just warns at every platform.
Maybe. I don't know that we've used the unsupported OS platform attribute to basically say unsupported all.
We don't have that now, for now. If you move a little more, that there is some instruction how it's supposed to work.
We do have some APIs that literally just always throw PNSE.
Right, like all the CAS types.
Yeah.
If you try to make them do work, it's because we don't support the feature of CAS in .NET Core. And I'm aware we call it .NET now, but that's not a good differentiator.
This is what you were mentioning earlier, though, right? Where we had a feature that simply doesn't exist.
Right.
And we presumably don't want this analyzer rule to kick in, correct? In those scenarios.
Right. So I guess really the question is, do we think that PNSE is used more for an OS thing or for a TFM thing?
I do want to question that assumption. Is it, forget the actual message that you get, but is it bad if an analyzer warns that you're calling an API that's not going to work?
I would probably say if a method unconditionally throws a PNSE, like that method should probably be marked obsolete or something, rather than unsupported on a specific OS combination. Because these attributes that we're discussing here are conditional, right?
What do you mean?
I guess my point is the analyzer doesn't need to be specific to these attributes. Basically, it's saying there's something that throws platform not supported and the method is unadorned. So what's going on? Do something. Whether that's attribute, unsupported OS platform or attribute obsolete, that's the developer's call.
Okay, that makes sense, I think.
Yeah, that seems fair. That it would warn if there's no unsupported OS, supported OS, or obsolete.
Yeah, or whatever attribute list we want to come up with. But.
Right.
I'm looking through some of our code. Like this is going to go a bit haywire in the SIMD code.
Because they're all PNSE bodies that get replaced at runtime.
They also have things like if like advanced SIMD isn't supported, throw new PNSE, but presumably the caller has checked is supported before calling it, and that's not really an OS check; it's a capability check.
What is the proposal for exactly what the analyzer looks for? Is the a method body that is purely nothing other than throw new platform not supported exception, like no if defs, no anything, just that?
I mean, the analyzer is on ref assemblies, right? Which don't have any PNSEs in them.
Why would the analyzer be on ref assemblies?
The analyzer is running during the compilation, and it's referencing all our ref assemblies.
No. This is, maybe I'm not understanding. I thought this is an analyzer that you run over your own code. In our case, we'd be running it over .NET runtime, looking for methods that unilaterally throw platform not supported exception and don't have an attribute on them.
Yep.
Not that you're calling a method that throws platform not supported exception and doesn't have an attribute on it.
Because we already have that analyzer. Well, sorry, we have the analyzer for the platform.
If this is just for us, then why do we need a public
Well, I think it would be for us or anyone else in a similar situation.
Yeah, if we need it, chances are someone else will too at some point, right? Chances are.
It may be useful to someone else. I think that we probably have more OS and legacy isms than the ecosystem after us.
But I mean,
But even our code is using ref assemblies as well, right? Between assemblies, so it's still not going to catch everything.
Ref assemblies don't factor into this at all. This is purely looking at implementation to say, does a method always throw platform not supported exception, and does it have an attribute on it? If yes, if it throws but doesn't have an attribute, warn.
Yeah,
during compilation.
During compilation.
Yeah.
So when we're compiling system, when we're compiling system text regular expressions and it's calling into something in core lib.
No, forget the call. There's no call. If system text regular expression contains a method foo, and a private method foo, and foo its entire implementation is throws new platform not supported exception, this would warn.
If we didn't have attributes on it.
If there were no attributes on it.
Saying that yes, we know that this is a PNSE and because it's not supported on the OS you're on or whatever.
I'm getting it now. Okay, now I'm fully understanding. I thought it was people calling methods that throw PNSE.
Yeah.
This is for the method itself that throws PNSE.
Yeah. Now that said, your question is valid. Like, if we believe that maybe it would be useful to other people, but really we're focused on ourselves and bootstrapping ourselves, we can add whatever analyzers we want into a .NET runtime specific analyzer and then see how useful it is and consider exposing it in the future. It doesn't, we can have things that are private to the .NET runtime because the 99.999% case is .NET runtime.
Do we have a spot for that yet?
We do have analyzers, like we had that pinvoke analyzer.
And that's part of .NET runtime, not part of the Roslyn Analyzers project?
It's either .NET runtime or .NET.
It was in Arcade. Yeah, we had it in Arcade.
Okay, so like on Jeff's notes / interpretation questions, he has anytime a body throws PNSE, and then I think Steve suggested the refinement of if the body is nothing other than throw PNSE.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be super, super, super noisy if this warned anytime throws new platform supported exception, showed up anywhere in the method body. That would be bad.
What would be some of the condition, or those tend to be if we're not on a specific OS platform, right?
No, but for example, like we've already decided that like for something like memory map file.create, right? Everything is supported on all platforms unless you specify a non-null name, in which case we can't support that on Linux, right? So we throw platform not supported exception if name is not null.
And we do not have a way to annotate conditional unsupported platform yet. So
correct.
Yeah.
Okay, so right, so if it's not 100% of the method, then it's probably input based, and there's no good way to decorate that.
And given that I think the vast majority case in the ecosystem, if something isn't Windows specific, it's single compilation for all platforms, if else per platform, in which case this isn't going to fire for those cases anyway. So it's not clear to me how much this is going to move the needle for the ecosystem at large right now. This really seems very specific to our needs.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure we've already found all of the cases of if the entire method body is throw PNSE. I think the tooling we did that helped us create the list of where to decorate attributes, found those. So this really was for Merrick's cases, those more nuanced places where the throw PNSE wasn't as obvious. But as you're saying, since we don't have a good way to decorate conditional support, I don't know that we get the value from this analyzer just off the simple body case. So we've got another story out there for finding a way to do conditional decoration. We might need to have that as a prerequisite for this. That until we can decorate conditional, if the parameter is null, then Linux unsupported, or other way around.
Okay, so is that we're saying no at this time? That it doesn't seem to have value, particularly as a public thing?
I don't think it has value publicly right now. And if someone believes it has value internally, anyone can go and do it.
Yep. I'll check back with Merrick, but I think that and MO, but I think the value would be nil at this point internally as well, if it's just a very basic throw PNSE body.
All right. Because we don't currently have the ability to mark things as OS specific based on parameter input, it can only be reliable for methods that are entirely throw new platform not supported exception. As such, we don't think there's sufficient value in it at this time. When it is possible to do something more complicated, the analyzer should not warn if the method is declared obsolete, in addition to the OS-based attributes. Did that cover it?
Yep.
Yep.
Four 45290. Add logger message .define overload to disable an is enabled check.
I'm not sure we have the right people in the room for this. I think Miriam and Tarek should be here.
Okay.
I can speak to this one.
Yep.
We have thread.start, which, like all good .NET methods that queue work to run on some other thread, captures the execution context and flows it across. We have a pattern, methods like thread pool, queues, or work item, where you slap an unsafe in front of it, and that means don't flow the execution context. We now have such an unsafe start, or two overloads of unsafe start internally on thread, and the proposal here is to just make them public.
What's the actual benefit?
The main benefit is the thread that's created doesn't end up rooting whatever was in execution context for the lifetime of the thread. So if you had some state in execution context in an async local and you spawned a thread, for example, with the portable thread pool now, which is now on by default, if you're doing something that causes a new worker thread to be created, because we were calling thread.start, anything in an async local would then be captured by that thread for the duration of that thread living in the thread pool. So by using unsafe start, it prevents that.
I mean, that seems like a bug in the thread pool implementation.
Well, the
Why-
thread pool is now using unsafe. It works around that by calling unsafe start. Like that's how it fixes it.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. Okay. I mean, presumably you could achieve the same thing by managing the execution context yourself.
Right. The workaround is for all these cases is to call if not execution context dot is flow suppressed execution context dot suppress flow and store whether you suppressed it into a Boolean. Then call the function you care about, and then after you call the function, say if Boolean equals true, execution context dot restore flow.
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
Yeah, this naming convention too also matches the typical naming convention for suppressing the execution context flow while talking thread. So it makes sense.
The unsafe naming is historical because execution context used to flow all of CAS and like all the CAS information and impersonation information and everything to do with security in .NET was flowed in execution context. Now it literally just flows async local. Now, certain things, in a sense, there's still aspects of security because things like Windows Identity now store the impersonation information in an async local. So you can kind of squint at it and say it's still a safety thing, but really this is just a historical naming pattern that we still employ everywhere.
Yeah. This API makes sense, honestly.
Any dissent?
I think the only question was one that GSPP raised, which is, we have two overloads of thread.start, one that's parameterless and one that takes an object parameter. He's wondering whether, and so the proposal was to do the exact same thing for unsafe start. He's just asking whether we would want to consolidate them into a single overload with a nullable, with a null defaulting parameter. And this is just really what's our guidance on this sort of thing moving forward, rather than, there's no performance issue here. It's just a question of what do we want our APIs to look like.
I think that one parameter and we don't expect future overloads, that default is the way that we would go. And that we would only split it if there was a perf reason, if it gets to avoid a bunch of conditional code that you're arguing is important.
I'm fairly certain unsafe start without, I can look. I think unsafe start just delegates to the other one.
Yeah, because null's the only thing we could pass. We understand how we would make future overloads. We don't expect to make future overloads, so we don't think that going from only one method in the method group to more than one is going to be complicated. So it seems like a good candidate for default to me. The only reason not to do it would be parity with the existing one. And if there were more than one default parameter, then we'd have the other rule that says have a simpler thing so people aren't confused by all the square braces in IntelliSense.
I think it's unlikely we'd add more overloads here. I mean, we've had thread.start since the beginning of .NET, and I don't think there's ever been a discussion about adding more there. It's not clear what more would even be. So.
All right. Any other feedback? Ship it. Four, 6, 7, 7, 5. Complicated words for p invokes.
So if Jeremy's not here, I can kind of go over this one. looks like he's not here. Okay, so basically, a long-standing issue is that on Windows for this call, or that is for C++ instance members, you can actually add an additional calling convention which modifies how the ABI works. In particular, it impacts struct returns in that simple struct wrappers are not treated as simple wrappers. They're actually treated as structs and have to be returned via a hidden out parameter. This is just proposing we expose a new callconv member that can be used with function pointers to clearly indicate that this is a member function, and therefore the JIT can do the right thing.
Okay. I am a little confused about, because the proposed API uses the words callconv member function and then sample usage does not. So
right. So
was this supposed to say callconv
No.
member function?
No. So the way the C# compiler works is it looks in the assembly that contains system object and has no dependencies in the system runtime compiler services namespace for any members that start with the name callconv. So callconv stdcall, callconv cdecl,
Okay.
etc. It then allows you to do everything that appears after the callconv in the attribute, in quotes, portion of the function pointer. So in this case, you say stand call member function. This is the same as the suppress GC transition member that we approved a few weeks ago.
Okay.
Effectively. And so it's intentionally not an attribute. It's intentionally just a class here, matching the same signature and layout as the other callconv members, and containing no members itself.
Okay, and is member function the best name of this calling convention?
So there were some other proposals in the issue, one of which was explicitly using CPP in the name.
Mm-hmm.
I believe Aaron and Jeremy overall indicated that they preferred member function.
Okay. Is there, I assume that since it's the C++ default, or maybe just the Windows C++ default, or I guess that would be the Visual Studio's built-in C++ compiler default, is there a name for it? Like, standard call has standard call?
No, it doesn't have an explicit. The closest thing is this call, but it's actually not this call. It's a instance member with a separate calling convention. And both Jeremy and Aaron indicated they did not want to reuse this call because of this. Also because they want this to explicitly be a modifier rather than interpreted as a proper calling convention itself.
Okay.
Similar to how GC suppress transition is meant to be indicated.
Okay. Yeah, but my only concern with it is it being sort of, vaguish, is that if we start supporting native calls to libraries built with mumble language, that, we have member function, which meant C++ conventions and something else. But if we can tell that from the other callconv and it's a modifier to that callconv, then I guess that makes sense.
Right, and as far as most ABIs are concerned, while they're built around C and C++ respectively, they aren't strictly tied to that. So, for example, what Linux uses is known as the Itanium ABI for C++, but it's actually just the general ABI meant for instance members and stuff for any compatible language. And so if you're invoking a C++ like member, instance member, you're expected to follow that calling convention.
Okay. Well, you've said enough words that my brain turned off. Does anybody else have dissent? Hopefully that was interpreted as humorly as I meant it to be.
It's the again this makes sense. It follows the established pattern that we have for things like Qualcomm schedule is pattern vendor. Tanner, do you know if Jeremy and others are lined up to do this work once the API is approved? Because there's like actual runtime implementation, right? It's not just an API.
Right. I believe that they're lined up. They already
Okay.
They already implemented suppressed GC transition, for example,
Perfect.
that we
Okay.
approved like a month ago.
Okay, I will get use out of that now that that's in.
I do not have context on this one. This one probably needs Aaron or Jeremy here.
So I understand the scenario for this. The right now, when you define a safe handle derived type, the way that the interop feature in the runtime works is, sorry, the convention is that you don't provide a public constructor for it. You provide a protected constructor primarily. And then there's a non-public set handle method, which is implemented on the base type. I believe that method's protected. Anyway, when you call a pinvoke method, the interop layer, if it's constructing a safe handle on the return, will use private reflection to call the safe handle constructor that basically that scaffolds the safe handle type itself, and then will again use private reflection to call the set handle method in order to say, here's the actual value of the safe handle. None of these APIs are exposed publicly, which means that if you're not within the runtime itself, like you have no choice but to use a reflection stack to do all of this. It sounds like what they're suggesting is exposing two public APIs on Marshall that do what the interop stack would have done through private reflection. That's also why if you look at APIs like create safe handle, the dynamically accessed member lists non-public constructor.
Having a public version of set handle bothers me.
For what reason?
Any of the places that a safe handle is exposed, you now just call set handle and change the value of what it's tracking, and it's gone from a type that is basically a GC tracked wrapper to it's a GC tracked wrapper that you can change the value in. I mean, I guess you could have always done that with private reflection, but adding the public API just feels dirty.
Maybe it
Sure,
only
so-
works if the handle's already null. If it's already set, then it throws.
No, I think I think set handle literally just sets the field and then doesn't do any other checks.
Well, that's
Because
the
it's
one
not
on.
something you're ever expected to call.
That's what the one on the instance member on safe handle. What it does, it's just
Yeah.
I don't even know why it exists because the handle field is protected, and all it does is set the handle field. But this one looks like it's exposing it as Marshall.setHandle safe handle comma handle.
But that's the alternative design listed here, which had been the original design. So scroll up. The actual proposal is basically make a parameterless constructor on all of our safe handles public and take the existing set handle instance method and flip its visibility to public.
Okay.
Aaron should be joining in about 30 seconds or so. So
Yeah.
So then Jeremy's comment is still valid, though.
Yeah, it just feels too weird to me to be exposing it. I think a much better guidance would be that we have constructors that take int pitter on all of our safe handle types, and you just construct it to what you want it to be.
Well, the problem with that is, and the purpose of this is, you construct your safe handle ahead of the call, ahead of the p invoke, such that if you were hit an you don't have to incur that after you've already called the native method and gotten back your in pointer that needs to be protected. So set handle is just setting a field because that won't fail.
So the source generator,
I
source
see.
generator is obviously not going to be inside the safe handle code.
Right. The source generator is for I write a p invoke that returns safe pipe handle or safe file handle in Stevens library.dll.
Right.
And the source generator emits the equivalent of the stub that the interrupt stub that the runtime would have generated for me at runtime.
Hey, Aaron's here.
Hi all. Sorry, I must have missed the meeting. I didn't see an invite. Sorry. Apologize.
No worries.
It's all good.
I caught the tail end of what Stephen was saying. He's right.
Yeah. Once he mentioned it makes sense. It's that you're supposed to create the instance so that you're guaranteed to have the ability to track it, then do the work, then do the OS call, and then link it back up. I like it better on Marshall, honestly. Like, I don't like having the public one, or the instance one public.
So in this case, the alternative proposal.
Well, maybe a blend.
The second half of the alternative proposal.
Like, it may be fine to say that our guidance is all safe handles should have a default constructor.
Okay.
Like, that's fine as a guidance formula. I have no objection there. It's just, should set handle be the public member on the handle, which means that we're now exposing to anybody that we return one of these instances to a way to mutate the value without reflection that's in their face, or do we put it on Marshall, which is you're going out of your way and you're messing with the system and have fun. And I like it better as the indirect of being on Marshall.
So provide guidance and add a new API instead of changing the visibility of the set handle, basically.
That's my personal preference, just so it keeps the safe handle object looking immutable, or looking like it's I track this thing or I dispose and then don't track anything, as opposed to you can change me willy-nilly.
There is precedent for having dangerous APIs on safe handle, and they're actually annotated with the dangerous prefix. It allows manual ref counting of safe handle instances. There is dangerous get handle. You could have dangerous set handle. I mean, it's a bit weird because in this particular case, well, with the existing dangerous methods, dangerous really means you're responsible for ref counting, like please don't get it wrong. Whereas if we have dangerous set handle, it's something beyond ref counting. It's also saying like you could potentially corrupt the instance state on the handle itself.
Well, I mean, it is
dangerous might still be okay.
Yeah, it is still dangerous in the same sense as the ref counting of, like, well, we have a reference count on this, but you're replacing the thing we're reference counting. We're still at count 11 on this, and you just replaced the handle. You've changed the meaning. You better be right. So,
I'm absolutely not. I'm absolutely for that as well. I preferred the API approach as opposed to exposing things, primarily because it will permit existing code to just opt in. That was the idea. There would be literally no change. Everybody's safe handles that currently exist would just work. I think just providing guidance for the constructor, that's pretty much self-explanatory and easy to do. The set handle, I have no preference. To be quite frank, I really don't. So I'm absolutely fine with that proposal as well.
Yeah, the reason I brought it up is just if we decide to make it an instance method on safe handle, I would probably prefer the dangerous prefix if it's public, as opposed to
public dangerous set handle just calls well, really it would just set handle instead of calling the safe handle or set handle method, which, as I mentioned, I don't know why we added it.
Well, so the short history here is this was designed around, it's all part of the built-in p-invoke system. So we can do whatever we want. It's implementation detail. Nobody cares.
Sorry, my comment is on the safe handle type, the handle field is protected, and the set handle member is protected, but there's no reason to call the set handle member when you can just assign the handle field.
Sure. That's fair.
That's the set handle that I don't know why exists.
Oh, I see. Gotcha.
In my safe handles, I usually just assign the field.
I see. Gotcha.
Tisk.
So, is there a strong opinion on that? Like, I do prefer, for all the reasons that I think Jeremy mentioned, and I think Levi, you're kind of in the same realm. I prefer it being on the Marshall class because it does explicitly mean like you're doing something very specific for a very clear reason, and it's related to marshalling. You're not just using it.
Yeah. I also like your comment, Aaron, that if we do it as marshal.create safe handle of, eventually there's a T in here somewhere. Yeah, there we go. That it means that this pattern works for all types, and we don't have the go retrofit our current ones that don't have a default constructor and put out guidance of, hey, by the way, for your safe handle to play nicely with source generators, you need to do this thing. It's like, well, here, Marshall will do the thing that the runtime was already doing. And
we could, and this was brought up, I don't know exactly where, but this was brought up on another thread about the source generator could actually detect that case and special case it and just emit the reflection call in the source generator when we are interrogating the type and saying, oh, it doesn't have a public constructor. We can just replace the new instantiation with customized code that just activates it because it knows that it does have a private constructor. So we technically don't need this. We can solve it. I don't know how people feel about the reflection-based component of this because it is going to. I know we're trying to get away from reflection in some of these lower-level APIs because of the linker concerns. So I really do appreciate the compromise. Like, yeah, let's update the guidance, tell everybody the thing, and add this new API. But there is it is going to be a larger PR when we update all of our existing handles and say they're all public now, just so that we can participate in this. So there are a couple of
I mean, whatever source generator could certainly, if it knows that the type it's creating already has a public default constructor, it could call that one and then only call this as we've done the reflection once and got it right, and anybody who's doing a source generator doesn't need to worry about getting it right themselves. So
that sounds like you're saying we kind of do both, right?
I think it's. So I think I'm suggesting. That's fun. I think I'm suggesting. Approve the API for the alternative design, and endorse the notion that we change our guidance that safe handle type should have a default constructor that represents an invalid instance.
And go and apply that guidance across all of our safe handles.
Yeah.
So when the source generator sees the default constructor, the public one, it calls the default constructor one, but then how does it set the handle? It always goes to marshal.setHandle?
Correct.
Okay. I'm fine with that.
And that way we I guess the argument here is we keep the safe handle clearly and clean. We don't have this weird set handle that's absurd. And that can really get you in trouble, which I think Levi's point is fair. If we would to expose that, it really needs a dangerous prefix because you're doing something wonky. And we can leave the set handle as is, I think. Yeah. The name.
I mean, marshal.setHandle doesn't really need reflection, right? Like we can just internally call an internal method on safe handle to set the field.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I like that design.
This is probably a really dumb question, but why wouldn't we instead add a constructor that takes the safe or that takes the handle, the end pointer handle, as opposed
So
to doing
the problem is, like, one of the reasons safe handle was originally introduced was to minimize the chances that you could make a native call, get back a handle, and then something goes wrong and that handle is leaked. And so with safe handle, the idea is you construct it before you actually make the native call that creates the handle you want to wrap, in case you were in a low memory situation. So because otherwise you make the native call, you get back the int pointer, then you go to allocate the safe handle and it ooms, and now you've got a leaked handle. So you allocate the safe handle first. If it ooms, you've not yet made the native call. Then you make the native call, you get back the pointer, and then storing it into the safe handle is just assigning a field, which won't fail.
Yeah. If this API is only intended to be used as part of that two-step dance, then perhaps we should fail if we can detect that you're not doing that two-step dance. Like if the handle is already assigned, then perhaps it should fail.
The new Marshall API, you mean, Jeff?
Yeah, the new Marshall.setHandle. In other words, it's not so much Marshall.setHandle, which lets you set it any arbitrary time you want and get yourself into all kinds of trouble. It's like Marshall.initHandle, and it's defined to only work on a handle that has been constructed using the default constructor.
Well, every handle is constructed using the default constructor. It's
and
possible.
Set.
Yeah, we could say
possible
where is invalid is
for
true.
zero to be a valid value for a handle.
Yeah, you need
on the handle.
So the way of it could be that the one on Marshall only works if safe handle is invalid is true.
Yeah,
but what if a handle allows the zero value?
Then its default constructor should have not used the zero value.
What if a handle literally allows any possible value?
Then is invalid will be false.
Then you
Correct.
would have no way of knowing that you've actually entered a reference track state on
it. I don't follow, because there is a separate field saying that the reference count has gone to 0. That's the is closed field, not the is invalid field.
Yes, but in the case of you have to create the handle, or you have to create the object and then assign the value, you have now no way of knowing you've assigned the value. So current p-invokes, you would theoretically be capable of freeing the 0 even if you weren't tracking the 0.
I do wonder if we're making this more complicated than it needs to be. We're already in the Marshall class, which lets you read and write arbitrary memory. And this code is going to be on the fast path of every p-invoke throughout the entire system once we have our way and source generators are used everywhere. I wonder if we really want to incur the cost of checking whatever and then throwing an exception and blah blah blah.
Yeah, I agree. We don't want to introduce any additional perf overhead. The perf of this absolutely is critical. So any kind of validation that we're not doing today is probably a non-starter. I just worry a little bit that once we expose a thing called set handle, somebody's going to use it, and then they're going to go, "Why didn't this work?" And
we'll say you called a thing on Marshall.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd be fine calling it Marshall.init handle for p-invoke or whatever, and if you use it in other situations, well, that's on you.
I mean, maybe we could call it init handle just to have a better sense of what it's intended for, but not actually validate anything.
Right, that's what I meant.
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
So under the covers, the init handle would just call set handle, but the idea here is that we're explicitly calling a function so it kind of describes the semantic.
Yeah, it describes the intended use of this thing, and anyone who looks at that and says, hopefully it would at least scare somebody off a little bit before deciding to call it, if, the name would at least inform them a little bit that way.
I think it's a fair argument.
Yeah, because I mean that matches slightly where I was thinking, if we were doing safe handle from scratch, that it would basically be that we would make the handle property be init only. So the C# compiler would stop most usages of assigning it. I don't know how you get around the init only. The fact if there's a pattern to skip it that the source generators would have been able to use, but
Can we go back to the create whatever method for a second? So Jan had proposed not adding that, and he had written, the code that a custom source generator could use. But Aaron, I'm wondering, like, if our plan is this, if our guidance is that every safe handle should have such a public constructor, and all of ours do, and if you don't, well, you're doing the wrong thing, but we're still going to make it work. Couldn't our source generator just spit out the activator.createInstance call, and it's not going to be as fast, but, well, you're not following our guidance, so update your code?
Oh yeah, that was my statement. Like,
Okay.
source generator can absolutely check that. That's
not only check it, but we don't add the method. It calls activator.create. Like, it generates the activator.createInstance call.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was getting at. Like, we can just throw that line that code has put up.
Right.
Okay.
So we don't need that create safe handle method in.
Okay. I mean, yeah.
Well, sorry. Can I make one comment?
Go for it.
I think what that does do, though, is it isn't linker friendly, right? Because now we're in this case, but maybe
Well,
that's
not linker, but doesn't the linker see activator create instance and know that it needs to keep the constructor of the specified type?
Yeah, it's special cased.
Okay, so then that's fine. I don't know enough about the linker to make a comment. I just know that we did hit a bunch of issues, and that was a concern. But
yeah,
if the linker's
I remember
Eric,
breaking
true,
that
right?
a few weeks ago.
There is.
Also, isn't there an activator create instance of T where you pass the type as opposed to type of? Or am I dreaming that?
That doesn't work if the parameterless constructor is public.
Okay.
But even
if it's public, just call it.
Eric, the linker is fine with the pattern that's highlighted on the screen right now, right? It'll keep the constructor for T safe handle.
Correct. Activator create instance is annotated as the type needs to preserve public constructors and non-public constructors that you're passing in. So as long as you're passing in the concrete type statically, it'll work just fine.
But if you pass in a variable,
generator,
it gets confused.
And Aaron, like, the source generator will, right? It'll if the return type was safe pipe handle and the actual generated code, it'll be activator.createInstance type of safe pipe handle. Right.
Sorry, I didn't follow that. Say that one more time.
Sorry, the code, the C# generated by the source generator, if I had a p invoke that concretely returned safe pipe handle, then if I were to look at the generated code, I would see activator.createInstance type of safe pipe handle spelled out in the code. Okay.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, we can make it do that for sure.
It's the same exact type. You're going to say new blah.
Yep.
Right.
That same type gets type of into create instance. Yep. That'll work just fine.
P invokes can't return abstract safe handles; they can only consume them.
Right.
Yeah. My concern, or thinking of why we would add the method, is because for not a source generator that we're working on, but anybody else doing a similar source generator, that if the amount of reflection was tricky, but if it's just activator create instance, then the only other argument would be to force it to have by being a generic method, you're forced to have a concrete type, or at least a composable concrete type, as opposed to activator create instance, which could use a variable of type. But if we're not concerned about that, then sure. Given how simple this line is, I'm okay with skipping the method.
Yeah, and we have other tricks that we can pull. If the source generator ends up producing slow code, like we can fix that up in post-production.
Yeah, I think the argument would be that our guidance is you have a public constructor, so this won't matter. All of our types, which represent the 99% case for safe, or 90% case, whatever, will have a public constructor, so it won't matter. And so the slightly slower construction code will only impact code until it updates to where they're using a custom safe handle and they've not yet updated to follow the guidance. And then all of your optimizations and activator create instance, Levi, kick in, and it's really no worse anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so it looks like the consensus here would be we update we update guidance. We special case the source generator with Jan's proposal. And if we detect that there's no public default, and then we create a new API on Marshall init handle and make some very mean comments about don't use this unless you know what you're doing, and move on.
And we add a public constructor to every safe handle defined in .NET Runtime, and pretty much the rest of the .NET SDK.
Right, we follow our own guidance.
Yeah, like this is probably we're probably gonna have to go make changes in .NET WinForms and .NET WPF and .NET ASP.NET Core and all those other repos as well to ensure that all those safe handles have public constructors, because pretty much none of them do.
So, sounds like we should have an analyzer that says your safe handle doesn't have a public constructor.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that. I agree.
I think WinForms has also been moving away from safe handles in a few places. They've been trying to make all of their p-invokes splittable specifically for perf, because safe handles aren't exactly fast. Same with bools, out parameters, refs, etc.
How do they do that in a safe way?
Disposing it properly.
Yeah, as long as you have the safe handle object in a using, everything's fine.
Well, most of the times you don't have a using that's possible. Like you'll have a native window which is wrapped by form or control, which itself has an underlying int which tracks the int pointer and is disposable, and you make sure it's disposed of via the finalizer or normal dispose pattern.
Right, but that's not safe, because now you could be in the middle of a p-invoke when the finalizer kicks in and drops you to 0.
Right. So if you're bypassing, like the point of safe handle is to make the invokes, somewhat easier for everyone to write, right? If you want to bypass them, then that's on you to make sure that you're handling lifetime correctly. Which is fine, right? If you're creating a very high performance library and you have the technical skill to be able to do this, like party on.
And that's what the public dangerous add ref and dangerous release are for, is if you can't put the object in a using, then you can dangerous add ref, finally dangerous release, and now you can use dangerous get handle in the middle for as many calls as you want.
Yeah, exactly.
I was just looking at source.net. It looks like across the various .NET repos tracked by source.net, there's about 200 types derived from either safe handle -1 is invalid, or safe handle 0 -1 is invalid, and they're sprinkled across the various repos. There's a couple in Windows Forms, there's a bunch in WPF, there's some in ASP.NET, there's some in Runtime, etc.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just to get back to the dangerous add ref release high performance discussion, if I understood correctly, the optimization there is if you're making multiple calls on a single safe handle, you can avoid multiple add ref and release by doing it manually. Is that the
correct?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to make sure there's not some other cleverness here that we should be doing in places like sockets, but it doesn't sound like there's anything in particular.
Yeah.
Yeah. The idea. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's you have to do, bool added ref equal false, try dangerous add ref the bool, and then in the finally if added ref dangerous release. Like you have to do that pattern. But once you've done that, it's safer.
Pattern. That's not any better. That's not any faster if you're just doing one call, right?
Right, because that's what the generator wrote for you.
Yeah.
Right.
Do we care about critical handle? Please say no. Someone please say no.
I don't think it has the criticality that it had in NetFX, but since it's a safe handle derived type, the guidance would still apply to those derived types.
Critical handle is not safe handle. They're sibling types, but they don't have the same hierarchy.
Okay, I thought critical handle extended safe handle.
Is critical handle supported by interop?
I'm just checking. I don't think so. We don't have a special case for critical handle if it doesn't inherit the way that.
It is in fact a special case by interop.
Oh, is it?
ilmarshallers.cpp.
Oh gosh.
I think critical handle is safe handle without ref counting, if I remember correctly.
Does look like it's missing dangerous add and dangerous release.
I
From
think the idea
YouTube
is that
chat,
it's supposed to be a faster safe handle.
Jeremy K says, well, that's not ambiguous. Uh, I'm sorry if I butcher your name. Jeremy
Yeah,
Krasinski
he's on the interrupt team.
uh,
Yeah.
says it's supported by the old system, not by the new system. It is supported in the runtime. It's a legacy type.
Okay. So if it's legacy, then we don't need to make any special APIs for it here.
Currently the source generators don't do anything special with critical handle. We only handle safe handle.
Sounds good.
And that's and to be just for full disclosure, the safe handle is the new source generator is an iteration past DLL import, and we are going to change things as time goes on. So we're removing functionality that just doesn't seem interesting.
Okay. All right. So we can ignore critical handle for purposes of this proposal. It sounds like. And if we need to do something later, we would follow the same pattern.
Okay.
All right.
So Stephen, just one final up. Stephen, would the completion of this work include going into all of those repos and making sure that their safe handle implementations are actually handled as well?
I think it should. In particular, I can't speak to. I've not looked to see what the cost is today. You know this better than I would, Aaron, of creating the safe handle in the runtime today. But I'm assuming that no matter how fast Levi has made activator create instance, that whatever we're doing in the runtime today is faster. Is that a true statement?
You should be using activator.create factory because it is guaranteed as fast as a new option.
Oh.
Can it
I don't know exactly what it's doing. I'd have to look at what it's doing specifically inside of the generated marshaller. I don't know off the top of my head.
The reason I'm asking is because presumably we're going to encourage. Well, let me change my statement. Any repo that we switch over, any safe handles that are public that we expect will be used by customers in their own p-invokes, or any safe handles that are used in our own repos with our own p-invokes, where we expect those p-invokes to switch to using source generators, we should make sure that the new source generator solution is as fast or faster than what they're currently using. And that if, sorry, this is a long stream of ifs, but if how these are created in the new way with reflection, activator create instance or create factory is slower than what the runtime is doing today, then we should make sure that they have a public constructor.
Okay, that's fair. So the plan for the source generator, just for right now, there's 2 steps to this because this is a very large mechanism. What we're basically doing is first pass on our source generator will be only for NetCore app. That is all that is going to be applied, and that is likely the extent of .NET 6. That is the current plan of record.
So the source generator won't be consumable in a supported way publicly.
That is the plan. We may make it support. We may make it. You can use it, but you're going to have to inject all the types manually. Like if you just want to have the code generated, that's possible. But we're not putting it into the box. We're not really evangelizing it. It's going to be just used for NetCore app for .NET 6, purely to prove out and make sure that we are creating a system that is robust, and more than likely in mid.NET 6 timeframe, we would make it more public.
Then I would suggest the target for .NET 6 should be that any safe handles we use in our own p-invokes, we add the public constructor to.
Okay, so that aligns with what, for anything in NetCore app we need to do, and then file the appropriate issues on everybody else about following this guidance, I guess.
Yeah.
I have one nit, which is that the summary, the doc comments now, could we update them to reflect where we ended up in terms of how we want to describe this method? In other words, say something like, initialize the handle of a newly created blah, blah, whatever.
I would just type the words. I'll make it pretty.
Yeah, sure. Something like that. It'll get reviewed better.
Blah. Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah.
Yep. Perfect.
We'll see if that ships. All right. Okay. So, sounds like we are in agreement. Thank you, Aaron.
Oh, thanks, all. Appreciate it.
Right. So there was.
I just want to, just before we go on to the next thing, I left a comment on the issue, but for the thread start one, or thread unsafe start, I was just looking at it and I realized we need to uncombine them. And I left a comment to that effect because there's some semantic differences between start that takes a parameter and start that doesn't, in particular around error handling. So I think we should just leave them as separate and have the exact same semantics as the existing start methods.
Okay. You want to just go ahead and update my comment and split it back out?
Yep.
And, thanks. Okay. So we have Jeremy Korzinski on YouTube chat. What was the thing we skipped because he wasn't here?
That would be the calling convention.
Oh, but we didn't skip that. We did it.
Yeah, we didn't skip it because I was able to cover that one.
Cool. So, thank you, Jeremy. Gee, this looks like Tanner.
Yeah. I also wanted to say, I missed it when it first came up because I didn't unmute fast enough, but I could speak to the logger message .define issue if you guys want to go over that.
All right.
So the basic premise here is in, types that use this logger, Microsoft extensions logging. You can use logger message.define to do this very efficiently. It uses structs to wrap up arguments and so forth to avoid allocations. And one thing it does is it doesn't do the actual log to the logging providers if the logger isn't enabled at all. So, sometimes the logger is just turned off. In this case, though, sometimes we want to skip the isDefine check in the generated action that's returned from logger message.define because we're already doing an isEnabled check ourselves. The example that David gives is accessing like connection ID, which could like lazily allocate a string. If there's no logger enabled, we'd rather not do that. So we can check before allocating the string, but then we effectively check logger is enabled twice because we're checking inside the generated action and outside before we call it. So this would add an optional Boolean parameter, which is skip enable check, which would say we've already called this defined ourselves effectively, so you don't have to do it in the generated method. Questions?
I mean, I guess another reason you may want to skip it is so you can save it as a field because they can theoretically get active or turned on later, or is that not a thing?
Yeah, no, it can. Yeah, it can be turned on as the process is running. Yeah.
So if you're saving it as a static read-only, you would almost always want to say skip enable check.
So maybe I missed this, but like, why you need to call logger is enable before you call connection start?
So in this case, it's kind of hidden. It could probably be more explicit, but connection.connection ID is doing some expensive operations. So if we don't need to log the connection ID, we'd just rather not access it. And by expensive, it's allocating a string basically, but still.
And the enable check is expensive?
Well, it's already happening, so we're basically just trying to avoid doing it twice. So
that's what I'm saying. But like that only makes sense if it's relatively speaking expensive, right? Like if it's extremely cheap, then
so
who cares?
It's also an interrupter.
Right, exactly. So it is virtual, and it's something that can be called very frequently. Like if you have ASP.NET or Microsoft extensions debug log enabled, you know, many logs per request, and you can do, you know, a lot of requests per second. So
I see.
Okay.
It's not unreasonable.
So this is just taking all the existing overloads of define and adding a skip enabled check on the end?
correct.
And is it fair to say that all the defines are usually in infrastructure code, like the vast majority of call sites basically always go through the delegate that it returns?
What do you mean by that? Like, we use it a lot for our logging. This is our primary way we define logging events.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I'm asking is because it already looks fairly involved to call the API, like as in it's relatively messy, but I guess you do it once somewhere, right? And then basically all the times when you actually call it, you go through whatever delegate that get returned, right? So the call sites are always moderately clean.
Right, yeah. So these delegates are created once per process, typically.
Yeah.
Any dissent?
No, I just noticed that one language syntax that does the dot dot.
Yeah, I mean, I assume that the T's are supposed to have been in the signature here somewhere, but like...
I don't think so. They are literally just like, because basically it returns the delegate, right? And that one just takes those.
Wait, what's the question about the template parameters? I mean, there's a lot of these overloads, so
yeah,
Dave's just saying time.
Do any of the defines use any of the T's in the signature, or is it just
Only...
because they return an action of those T's?
Yeah, they only
return an action of those T's.
Okay.
Yeah.
Looks good as proposed. All right, garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah,
we'll use your same dot 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 syntax. And leave the plus, because I'm lazy.
Yep.
If Emo wanted not lazy, he would have showed up on time. Welcome, Emo.
I cannot disagree with that statement.
All right. Some poorly named, looks like they came from C, math functions. Tanner.
Yes, so there's a set of math functions that are recommended by the IEEE spec that are exposed in most other languages, including Java, Rust, Go, C++. We actually exposed these in the mono Android Java Lang namespace for compatibility there under these names. But essentially the proposal is we should be exposing these functions as they are useful for a number of mathematical scenarios, and they help avoid precision and loss of accuracy when computing with the inputs. So in particular, there's HiPot, which computes the hypotenuse. I opted for the short name just because that's what we've done with every other math API exposed so far, such as square root, cube root, sine, cosine, etc. There's xm1, which is e to the power of x minus 1, and its inverse log p1, which is log x plus 1.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that if exp m1 was spelled out to exp minus 1, I would still know when I would want to use it in math, so I don't know that there's a better name than the C function, but I don't like them.
Tanner, is your comment in this issue that there are actual instructions for this?
There's not hardware instructions. They are implemented by the C runtime. but none of these have actual hardware instructions.
How would we be able to not lose accuracy?
They're internally implemented. So for example, there's no hardware instruction for exp. It's generally just a Taylor or Newton-Raphson implementation that does enough iterations to be correct. That's the case with all of these functions.
So it would be potentially a little slower than doing the naive x squared plus y squared square root, but it would give you a more accurate result.
Correct. The same reason why exp exists rather than just doing math.pow, because exp is actually able to use the base as if to infinite precision, rather than if you do pow, you actually have to use the rounded version of E.
Are there other APIs that we would want to add here? You have a few listed later in the issue.
Right. So the full set of APIs that we're missing is actually a little bit more extensive, directly related to these ones. We would be missing the core. We already exposed log 10, and log 2. There's log +1 functions for each of those. So if we were to be have parity, we would also be exposing log 2 P1 and log 10 P1. The IEEE spec also exposes exp2 and exp10, which we do not today, and then exp2 -1 and exp10 -1, which would also be for parity. When this proposal was first proposed, we did not expose log 2 or log 10.
And they're all in the C runtime and all directly call them? Yep. Is there any endeavor for us removing the dependency on the C runtime?
We are likely not going to move the functions to managed code. It's possible that we eventually centralize on a single native implementation for all platforms, but that's very much up in the air and still needs further design work and discussion.
Yeah, I mean, in principle, I have zero problem with exposing additional math APIs. My only concern is that because, they're probably not trivial to implement, if we can just call them from the C runtime, it's fine. But if we have any plans to remove the C runtime, then, any method we call becomes a liability, right? Or any function, I should say, we call becomes a liability. So unless that's the case, I don't see an issue with it.
Yeah. And I think even if it was that we eventually decide to port these to managed code, I imagine because of the number of math APIs and because of difficulties and other things, it would likely become an iterative process.
Sure.
So I wouldn't be concerned with the number of APIs we're exposing.
Given the different runtimes that we compile against, do they all return the same result given the same inputs?
No. Because they all forward to the C runtime, and each C runtime implementation is different, which we've had, potentially at least tens, if not hundreds of bugs over the years against, but it's an incredibly complex issue. And I've got a work item for .NET 6 to write up the proposal on how to handle that and try and drive it forward. But because of the complexity of the area, it just takes a lot of time to make happen.
But it sounds like this would not unreasonably exacerbate the problem.
Correct. Yeah. If we choose a native implementation to centralize on, all of them will already be exposing these functions, and so it would just be essentially changing from calling the C runtime to calling a linked libim instead.
Yeah, and presumably some amount of variation here could be the 2019 version of the spec versus the 1997 version of the spec, etc., with recommended ways of computing them?
No. At least as far as the spec is concerned, The only thing that they've changed on is the recommendation for max and how it handles not a number, in that they made it well defined and exposed another variant that handles the alternative desired case.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I really think that better names would be better. On the other hand, we do have math.squirt, math.kibert, etc.
Well,
and matching C
I
seems to be our convention on these. So
I think on the other hand as well, the names like squirt are often seen on calculators, and in mathematical notation, they're supported by things like Wolfram Alpha. They're fairly common names, just like you use cos, not cosine.
Right. Do you feel that is the same with exp10m1?
Yeah, typically speaking, like on Wolfram Alpha, if you do exp10, it interprets it as 10 being the base of the exponent. And you do log 2, the 2 is generally, if you're doing proper mathematical notation, it's the subscript.
Right.
But if you can't, then it just
But does
becomes
Wolfram
normal.
Alpha do the M1 and P1 variants?
That I don't know.
Because I can believe it for the 2 to the x and 10 to the x things, but the M1s and P1s are a little weird to me.
Yes, it does support exp_m1.
Okay. So, given that, I shrug at the full set.
I think that's kind of where we are. I think Tenor will make the math functions like crypto APIs.
Well, we're getting very close to the point where we've exposed all recommended IEEE functions. The ones we're missing are, like I mentioned earlier, exp2 and the others for parity, compound, root to an arbitrary in, and then some sine and cos and tangent overloads that deal with pi, because pi in floating point is non-exact, and these APIs allow you to interpret it as an exact pi.
Mm-hmm.
So we've only got like 10 or 20 more functions overall that we're missing.
Should we just bite the bullet and do them all then, and then call it a day? Or, I mean, these are not special by any stretch, right? It's not that we needed them somewhere, right?
Right. We've just had user requests for one or more of them, and then also the general push for myself to try and get closer towards IEEE compliance.
Because I think if what we're saying is we want to do all of the recommended operations from 7/54/2019, then maybe we should just say we'll go ahead and approve all of them, and we don't care when they get implemented. That's not this group's decision. We just say that we're okay with the names.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the thing. I mean, fundamentally, like, if we just match the C runtime names, I think it's trivial. I think as soon as we try to like improve the naming, then the more we know, the easier that gets. But otherwise, we end up in a world where we have like, we have these semantics, but then, based on additional functionality that become inconsistent, or we can't keep it up or something. So that might be easier. But if we just match the names, it probably also doesn't matter, I guess.
All right.
But it would still be easier for us to just approve the whole set.
So, I think that sounds like I should mark this as needs work. Send it back to Tanner for please give all of the functions from recommended operations, and we'll give it a quick go through on the nod in a later meeting.
Yeah, I mean, if it's 20, it's fine. If it's 5,000, then maybe not. But yeah.
That sound all right to you, Tanner?
If you give me like 30 more seconds, I'll have typed them all in chat.
30 seconds. Jesus.
So not 5,000.
That's what I'm hearing.
Tanner's a really, really fast typist. Now I'm just imagining singing like the Animaniacs Countries of the World song, but with the IEEE math functions.
So the list that I just typed is the full set that we are missing. It's exp minus 1, exp 2, exp 2 minus 1, exp 10, exp 10 minus 1, log plus 1, log 2 plus 1, log 10 plus 1, hypotenuse, compound, root in, sine pi, cos pi, tan pi, and then a sine pi, a cos pi, a tan pi, and a tan 2 pi.
And they all
So-
take one argument? No. Some of them take...
No, a tan 2 pi takes 2, and compound and hypot and root in take 2.
Yeah, I think at this point, like, just type out the signatures, and then we can just approve it Tuesday.
Okay.
Might be
Yeah.
easier.
Yep. For root in particular, I think that's the one where we would deviate on the name. When we exposed log, for example, we took the base as an explicit separate argument, and we didn't call it log in. So in this case, we'd probably just call it root and take the base as an explicit argument.
I mean, this is cool stuff. I mean, this is another area of fundamentals where stuff just gets better.
Tanner, I have to ask, were you looking at a list somewhere when you generated that, or is that just off the top of your head?
No, I was looking at the 754 spec.
Okay, I feel better about myself.
All right, so I've bounced that back as needs work with, we just want to see the signatures for all of these, and then our eyes will glaze over and then we'll approve it. All right. This doesn't sound like a 10-minute thing, but we can quickly glance. It might be a 10-minute thing. All right, 25608 vectors and span. So it looks like adding read-only span constructors and writable span copy twos on the vector 2, 3, and 4 types. So I think that's still you, Tanner.
Yep. Basically, we expose these on vector of t. We're missing the overloads for vector 2, 3, and 4. On vector of t, we also expose span constructors, but that I think was just an oversight because we also exposed the read-only span ones. And since span is convertible to read-only span, I opted just read-only span for these ones.
Byte and T. So why T? Like, I mean, I understand because they're all strongly typed, right?
Oh, sorry, that was a copy paste. They'd be float.
Yeah, okay, that makes more sense now.
Okay.
And then for byte, I guess we know that float and double have consistent encoding. There's no little endian, big endian weirdness.
There is, in that if you're on a big Indian machine, you have to read it as a big Indian float, but we expose the same overloads for vector of t.
T has byte and T?
Yep. It's got both byte and T. I'd be fine with saying we just support float here. And if someone really wants to use byte, they handle it themselves, or
yeah, they could do the
unsafe as
unsafe as or whatever it is.
I mean, I guess to me the question is like, what's the common situation? But I honestly don't know.
Well, I think saying that we want to start with that is of just adding the span or read-only span afloat constructors and the writable span afloat copy twos, starting with that, and if someone really has an argument for why they want the bytes and not to not have to use unsafe as, then they can try arguing it. But since we don't already have on these types a copy to a byte array, we only have copy to a float array. I think that this is spanification, or simple spanification seems like a good start.
Yeah. What about the try overloads? We don't care, or
Do we expose try overloads today?
yeah, we have on vector of t we have try copy to that takes
Yeah,
a span byte and
then we should have those as well, and I just missed them in the writing up the proposal.
what do they do? They just return false when the destination isn't large enough?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, that seems reasonable.
Are those tries good tries that out how much they wrote?
No, because you can ask upfront.
Yeah,
I mean, at least on vector of t, you can ask for the length, right? And it's static anyway. And on the other one, it's the same thing. I mean, you know how big a vector 2 is, right? It's like GUID, right? I think for GUID we didn't do it either because we said everybody knows how wide a GUID is.
Yeah, I mean, doing the out or adding the out variant means that you have a nice pattern for composition instead of like special casing per type you're calling. But I think that's how we justified it after the fact with GUID was, or that we suggested always doing it, or maybe only I suggested always doing it for composition purposes. So,
yeah, for GUID we didn't count the number of bytes. I think we did it for other types.
And remind me, like the one that takes the span, I mean the constructor, will it fail when it's larger? Are you supposed to slice to like exactly 2 floats or exactly 3 floats up front, or are we just saying like, oh, we read as much as we can? What?
I think it's read as much as we can, but let me double check.
I mean, it should match whatever semantics the current constructor that takes an array, which doesn't exist. Never mind.
Yeah, that's the thing. I guess it's on vector of t. I think vector of t, whatever the semantics we have there, we should probably match.
Which is, it just requires it to be at least as big as.
Yeah, and then you're supposed to slice after with length, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which in this case you would have to manually say whatever the size ends up being.
all right, I think that covers it. So copy 2 and try copy 2 span afloat. Constructors that take read-only span afloat and do what vector of t does.
You want to do me a favor, add a namespace around it.
That requires that I know what the namespace is.
Numerics. Yeah, the only reason I want this is because I haven't done it yet, but I have a prototype where I'm indexing the APIs we approved so we can search after the fact. And it works better when we actually know the namespace of the API. Wouldn't it be nice if you could just select lines and hit tab?
Does that actually work in GitHub?
No.
Yeah.
Because that would be a feature.
In Stack Overflow, I think highlighting everything, there's a Control K or something indents it, but I don't remember if it is indent and toggle indent or what. But because they don't have triple backslash, they just have, if everything's indented 4 spaces, it's code formatted. Okay. So
looks great.
Limited approval, and it is lunchtime on the Pacific Coast, so I think we are done for the day.
Excellent.
And we still have 30 issues or close to it, right? 27.
Yeah, but many of them are yours.
What?
You should be happy.
No, I meant like the influx rate is right now relatively fairly high. Like it keeps like we keep reviewing things and we still keep hovering at 30.
Yeah,
So
but
clearly
like
we have a high incoming rate right now.
But like, these two were probably, a few seconds to talk about, or a few minutes to talk about one, and then we just approve the other one, like we did with some crypto obsolescence earlier.
Yeah. Fair enough.
But yes, hopefully we can get back to one a week soon and be happy about that. Alrighty.
Awesome.
So that was quite a productive session, and we'll see how well the publish button works after this. So thanks, everybody.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.